for a closer analysis of Mr. Biden's speech. Joining us live is Dr. Tricia Craig. She's a senior lecturer in global affairs at the Yale NUS College. Dr. Craig, thanks for joining us. Now, what do you make of the tone and delivery of Mr. Biden's speech, given that numerous polls show a lot of Americans are not quite enamored with his leadership? He clearly made an effort to speak directly to middle class and blue collar workers. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. I think given that at this point in his presidency, his polling numbers are really at kind of historic lows for a president. So he really has ground to make up. He's got a tough road ahead with a divided Congress. So he needed to reach out to the American people. And that's what he did. As you point out, he really reached out to blue collar workers. Some of the points that he brought up were really trying to address the pain that people are feeling. On one hand, he took credit, I think where credit is due, for the economy coming out of the pandemic, the recovery, the very low unemployment rates that we're seeing, moderation of inflation. This is important, but we know from how the American people are feeling, even though the numbers on the economy look good, a lot of people aren't buying it. More people are saying that they are afraid of the direction the country is going in economically. They're not so trustful of his economic leadership. So he really has to make that case that on one hand, the economy is really improving. As he said, we've still got work to do, but it is on an upward trajectory, and balance that with the feeling of a lot of people that the prices that they're seeing, whether it's at the grocery store or at the gas station, even if they're coming down a little bit, they're really feeling the effects of inflation. They may be getting raises in this economy. We know that salaries are going up, but they're not keeping pace with inflation. So people are feeling poorer. His job here was to balance that out. I thought he maybe got halfway there. He did a great job explaining where the economy was, where it's going, how it is getting to where it needs to be. But I'm not sure that the sort of empathetic Biden, at least in this particular sense, came across as sometimes it does.
And Mr. Biden also reached out to Republicans who now, of course, control the House, asking them to work together for the sake of the country. But then he got very loud boos when he talked about the debt limit and Republican demands to link a debt limit increase to spending cuts. Then he also said no president has added more to the national debt than Trump. So that really got a reaction out of them.
It really did. I think we knew that something was going to appear in the speech about the debt ceiling. This is something that the country is going to struggle with over the next couple of months. These are going to be tough negotiations. As we know, the U.S. has hit the debt ceiling. That doesn't mean that economic chaos happens immediately. And we will have to work over the next couple of months to ensure that it doesn't. I think that he did a very good job of talking about why the debt is where it is. He did, as you point out, talked about the fact that under the Trump administration, that added 25% to the debt. Of course, he didn't talk about the Democrats' role in that, which was, a lot of spending to help the pandemic recovery. But I thought he also, in the minds of voters now, he is linking the debt ceiling question with the kind of cutbacks that Republicans might demand in order to raise the ceiling. And so he went immediately to potential cutbacks in Medicare and Social Security. That got a lot of reaction from the Republicans. But I think that one of the things that we'll see over the next couple of weeks is that's going to be a really important talking point for the president and his messengers in terms of the debt limit. The other thing, though, I would say is that he did quite a lot of there was quite a lot of focus on this speech on bipartisanship. He throughout talked about how many of the programs that had been passed came about as the result of bipartisanship. And at the very end, he went back to that notion of bipartisanship, kind of recapping all of the advances that had been made with working together. And so I think that part of that is really meant to play the role of the sort of moderate statesman, the person who can reach across the aisle, and potentially setting the Republicans up to look like the spoilers, like the ones who are not sort of willing to work with the White House.
Doctor, this was a very domestic-focused speech, and he did briefly touch on Ukraine and support for the country, calling Putin's invasion a test for the ages, but then he moved on from that fairly quickly. So what are you reading into this?
Well, the State of the Union is always a very domestically focused speech. It is really trying to lay out a domestic agenda. It's attempt to get support for the president. And if he is going to run again, he really is going to need to raise his standing, not just among voters in general, but also among Democrats. That said, I think the focus here on foreign policy is really linked to his notion that America is back in the position of being a world leader. I think the Ukraine reference, he mentioned that, last year at this time, he was standing up to Putin. We're still standing up to Putin. I think that's extremely important because one of the things that we know is that this war is not going to be over quickly. And while there has been bipartisan support, both among voters and among legislators, for continuing aid to Ukraine, a long, drawn-out, protracted war with no sense of when it might end, that could change, and changing in an election year would be very detrimental for the president. So I think he really has to sort of hone in on the fact that America is saying they're in this for the long haul, and in a sense, he's preparing the American people for that.
He also didn't directly mention the Chinese surveillance balloon, but he did say that if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. Some were expecting his rhetoric on China to be a lot sharper. Were you expecting that as well?
So I was really surprised at the lack of a mention of the balloon, although I think it was the right, politically, I think it was the right decision. In the days up to the State of the Union, we had heard a lot about, the speech was being rewritten. It would start with, references to the balloon. I think it was actually a quite wise move to allude to the balloon, because obviously it's on everybody's minds. It has been a big political issue over the last week in the U.S. But I think that just as coming out of the G20 meeting in Bali in November, I think there's a real sense and desire on the part of the White House and also on the part of the Chinese to sort of lower the temperature of the rhetoric around U.S.-China competition. So I think he said what he needed to say. He did not need to go into the balloon itself, because I think that has sort of hot emotions around it. And so I think this was Biden's way of signaling that we are continuing to try to lower the temperature and to, yes, be competitors, but when it's in everybody's interest to collaborate, they will.
And Doctor, one final question. How important is this speech in Mr. Biden making his case for his re-election in 2024? And do you think he did it successfully?
I think we have a sense of what the big issues are, and I think what he really needs to he laid out the places where I think the administration can really point to achievements. I think that those achievements have not been necessarily recognized by the American people. Things like progress on the environment, things like inflation, the economy. So I think that we see what the speeches are going to be about, where the points that they're going to focus on are. But now the job is really going out and selling that, because right now what we know about the American people is that they are not convinced. And as someone who, even amongst his own party, voters would like to perhaps see a different set of figures running for president, he's got an uphill battle. But at least now we know what the contours of that are going to look like.
Dr. Craig, thank you very much for your insights. That was Tricia Craig, Senior Lecturer in Global Affairs at the Yale NUS College.